Hello and welcome to the channel. Today what we're going to talk about is a new feature found in Power Automate that will let us cancel Cloudflow runs, and we can do so using Power Virtual Agents. Let's go. So Microsoft recently introduced a new action in the Power Automate management connector that allows you to cancel a flow run. Now what's important to understand is that this connector and this specific action will run under the maker scope. So what that means is that there's two versions of the Power Automate connector. If you go ahead and look for it inside of the designer, you're going to see Power Automate, and then you're going to see Power Automate for admins. Now when you use the admins connector, naturally that gives you administrative actions provided you have the right credentials and permissions. And then the other one is more in the maker scope, meaning me as a maker, I create a flow, I can go ahead and use that connector to manage my flow. I can't go ahead and use it to manage someone else's flow unless that permission has been shared with me and I'm a co-owner of those other flows itself. But, we can still work with that. Now, in order to cancel a flow, we need some details about the flow. So we need to know what environment it's in. We need to know its internal GUID or flow name. And then lastly, we need to know which instance of that running flow we want to cancel, or what's often referred to as the run instance ID. Now, we can go ahead and obtain this information by using the workflow expression. So I talk a little bit about the workflow expression, but I've got more info on that particular expression here. Video 75, capture Cloudflow metadata during runtime. By using the combination of this workflow expression plus the cancel flow run, we're in really good shape to do something interesting. Now, where does PVA come into place here? So we're going to actually use PVA as a user interface so that we can actually go ahead and surface this information. We'll start a Cloudflow from PVA. We'll get information or the metadata about that run instance. Then we can use that information to subsequently go ahead and cancel the run. So stay tuned. Let's go deeper into it. Now, when you find the action here, cancel flow run, and you're going to find it in the Power Automate connector. This is going to be the connector for makers. There's kind of, typical user experience here, right? Where we've got a static version where we can go ahead and select static values, like pick a specific environment, pick a specific flow. Naturally, this is going to be dynamic. That's something that's generated every time a flow runs. That's essentially a run instance ID. But we can go ahead, and if we know that these values are static, we can go ahead and set them that way. But otherwise, what we can do is go ahead and provide these values dynamically as well. And so this is where we're going to collect this information through the use of Power Virtual Agents. And that workflow expression that I talked about earlier on the previous slide, in order to derive these values, then we're going to go ahead and pass them in. So let's go ahead, let's jump into a demo, and we can see exactly how all of this works. So what we're going to do, we're going to start in Power Virtual Agents. And there's kind of two topics, and there's going to be two Cloudflows that make up this solution. So number one, we need to be able to kick off a Cloudflow in order to cancel a Cloudflow, right? So that's what we're going to go ahead and do here. So some just very simple trigger phrases just to illustrate how this all works. So we're going to go ahead and call a flow. And so in this case, this is essentially a hard-coded Cloudflow. This isn't dynamic. But what we can now do is go ahead and kick this off. And so I think this is kind of a scenario where if you had, say, a center of excellence where you've got, say, a specific group of people that work or share a specific group of Cloudflows, then, and RPA could be factored into this as well. But if you had something like that, then I think this sort of demo will align well to that. Now, in this case, just for demonstration purposes, I'm not going to go ahead and pass any inputs, but if I needed to, I could. Then what I'm doing here is I'm just going to go ahead and have a compose action. And what we're going to do here is we're going to use the workflow expression. Now, if we come over here, we can go ahead and retrieve specific attributes from the workflow expression. And I'll show you this when it runs. But when you call workflow, it's going to give you this JSON payload that includes many different attributes. And for that reason, I talk more about this expression in the video I referenced on the previous slide. So if you're interested in more details, go ahead and check it out. But bottom line is we can go ahead and grab specific attributes from this workflow expression. So what we're going to do first is we're going to get the name of the workflow. This is going to be a GUID. So for example, this would be the GUID for this specific Cloudflow that we have here. Then what we're going to do is get the run instance ID. So if you ever go ahead and look at run history, you're going to see a link, and we're going to do this once we go through the demo. There's an ID that's associated with that run. That's essentially this value here. And then lastly, we've got environment. So we're just going to go ahead and look at the JSON payload that's returned from workflow, and then we're going to find that there's a node called tags, and then within there an attribute called environment name, and we're going to go ahead and retrieve it. This is going to be the value that we find up here. This would be the environment for this specific Cloudflow itself. Now what I'm going to do is just from a PVA perspective, go ahead and return the value back to PVA. So we're just going to essentially concatenate all of these values and then return it. You might be wondering why I've got these like backslashes here, and in this case some stars. This is Markdown. This is supported. You'll see this when we run it. We can go ahead and do some formatting. Now in order for this demo to sort of be real, what we're going to do is we're going to let this Cloudflow continue to run after we've returned these results. And here we're going to go ahead and just delay for 3 minutes. During this period, that gives us time to use the values that are being returned here to go ahead and call our cancel flow. And so let's go ahead and take a look at that now. So back into PVA, and we'll go back over to topics, and we're going to go ahead and cancel flow. So in this case, we can just cancel my flow, cancel flow. We'll go ahead and kick off this specific topic. Now in this case, here's where we're going to ask for the details. Provide your environment name, which is going to be a GUID. Provide your flow name, which is going to be a GUID. Provide your run ID, your run instance ID. That's going to be kind of like a GUID without the dashes. And then what we're going to do is we're going to pass these 3 parameters or inputs into our cancel flow. We're going to return that specific status back to the chatbot through this message action here. So let's go ahead, let's look at cancel flow. Now in this case, we're going to have those 3 parameters or inputs that I just talked about, and then we're going to have this cancel flow run. And so you're going to find this specific action. If you come in here and just type in power automate, and then just click this down, and then we've got 2 connectors here, and this is why it's important. We've got one for admins, one for users. This is a user scoped action, as I've mentioned before. And so what this is going to mean is I can only go ahead and cancel flows that I have access to. And so that's where you have to sort of really think about who would be using this and sort of how do you want to expose it to them. And you're likely going to be in a situation where you do need to share the Cloudflow with, say, a security group if you want to have multiple people having the ability to go ahead and to perform this on sort of these shared Cloudflows itself. Now, what we're going to do, assuming this is successful, and actually we could go ahead and provide a little bit more error handling here. We're just going to return a status back indicating that your request has been made to cancel. This will run quite quickly. We'll take a look at it in the run history, and we do see that there is a status of OK 200 returned, which means that that execution has completed. So let's go back to PVA. Let's hit a reset here, and let's go ahead and run this. So let's go ahead and click on run flow, or provide the term run flow. Okay, so we've gone ahead and kicked off our flow. If we head over to the call flow itself and we hit refresh, we can see that it's running. So now I have 3 minutes to go ahead and to cancel this. So let's now type in cancel flow, and we're going to need these details here. So the first thing is the environment. So we can go ahead and copy and basically paste this in. Next up, we need the flow name, right? So we're going to go ahead and grab this value. And then lastly, our run instance ID. And then this is going to go ahead and call our cancel flow. And we can see that that request has now been made. So if we head over to the call flow, and it was previously running. Let's go ahead and let's refresh this. We can now see that it's been canceled. And so it was canceled as a result of our cancel flow, which we did go ahead and call. And so, as I mentioned before, these are what's known as run instances. When you put the browser or you hover over it, you can see in the bottom center of the screen that we've got a specific value, or we can see it here in the URL as well. So what happened here is we went ahead, we went and canceled this flow, we passed in those details, and if we want to look at the outputs, here we can see that we have a status code 200 from that perspective. Now, I would expect a different error if we didn't have the proper access to that specific Cloudflow, and so that's where you would want to have some scopes around here and just check to see the status and configure your run after if necessary. And so what we'll do now is we'll just go ahead and return that status back to PVA, and that's how we know that our flow has been canceled here. Now, what also is interesting is you could get into a situation if you wanted to like batch or bulk cancel. Now, naturally, that would mean that you need to track all of these run instances somewhere, like perhaps like a database like Dataverse or something like that. And then you could go ahead and batch cancel these. Now, it kind of depends on what you're doing. Like obviously RPA, you typically have longer running processes. So that one might make more sense. Typically, if you're just using the actions within a Cloudflow, unless you've got like approvals, those typically execute quite quickly. But I could see some cases where you maybe have approvals and things are just taking a long time. You want to just cancel them and clean them up. That might be a good use for that as well. But if you do use that workflow expression, you can capture metadata. You can use that metadata to then go ahead and cancel out those specific instances. All right, so thanks for checking out another episode on YouTube. Likes, subscribes, comments, all welcome. And if you're not following me on Twitter, go ahead and find me at Weare. Thanks again for checking out this video, and we'll talk to you again soon. Take care.